Okay, today we're going to be talking more about the trials of Jesus. Now, I'm not going to go back over in a reviewing today, but we're just going to get right down to the point because I want to cover a lot of material and try to put all of the rest of the trials in this morning so we can see really what happened. Now, Jesus has been brought in and his trials are starting. And so far we have seen that they've taken him to Annas, and then they've taken him to Caiaphas, and now then they've taken him to Pilate. And that's where we closed this last week with Pilate. Remember, Pilate and Herod are the two Roman men, and the Annas and Caiaphas would be the Jewish trials that he's going to be having. So now as we take a look at this, last week we saw this chart. They brought him in to Pilate, and so Pilate looks at him and says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered and said, "It is as you say." In other words, yes, it just like you said, I am the king of the Jews. Well, Pilate said to the chief priest and crowd, "I find no fault in this man." Now, remember, this is an abbreviated explanation that in this case Luke has of this. And as Pilate is talking to him, he boils it down and he sees that they have accused him up there in the black of where this fellow has been perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, and he says that he is the Christ, a king. Now, the Jews are going to make a big play on this, so let's see it as it goes through. They are going to try to get Pilate to see that Jesus is a traitor, that Jesus claims to be a king, and he's getting ready to set himself up on a throne, declare war on Rome, and do away with the Caesar. Now that's the way that the Jews are going to try to approach Pilate, showing Pilate, you better do something, Pilate, because if you don't do something, as soon as Caesar sees that you are permitting this man who wants to become a king and fight Caesar, then Caesar's going to come down on your back. So, what Pilate asked him, he started, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he says, "Yes." Now, Pilate looks at it, and Pilate is trying to make a judicial decision. They're wanting him to put Jesus to death. On what grounds? Because Jesus said he was the king of the Jews. Pilate is not upset. Pilate is not impressed. That is not a crime. It's just like if I came in today and I claimed that I am the new president of the United States. Well, about all you do is grin at me. Nobody's going to throw me in jail. You say that's a stupid claim to make. That's the way Pilate is. Is this all there is against this guy? Just like if I claim to be the President of the United States? So he tells the Jews, "I find no fault in this man." Now I've got down there in blue something because here's where the tide starts to turn. But they were the more fierce. Now then the Jews are really getting mad, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place." In other words, he's a troublemaker, and he's caused trouble all the way from Galilee down here. And you need to take care of this. Well, here it says that Pilate dismissed him. Get him out of here. So the Jews then are going to take him back. They led Jesus from Caiaphas to the Praetorium. Now this would be the Praetorium of Pilate there again. It said, "But they themselves did not go into the Praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover." Let's talk about this for just a moment. Now, as we look at this time, let's review ourselves as far as time is concerned. Now this is Thursday evening, and this is when the Passover supper took place. Now everything from chapter 13 down to now is taking place on the same night, Thursday night. Thursday is the Passover. The Passover would start about 6 o'clock in the evening. And so I've put up in blue some guesses. These are guesses. We don't know how long any of this took, but I think there'll be a pretty good guess. The Passover supper I've got, let's say, from 6 to 9. And you say, why do you give it 3 hours? Because the Passover was a long dinner. The rules were set and take it easy, eat, eat, eat until it's all gone. And so if you have to, you eat all night. And so it was a long dinner. Jesus did some teaching in there. Then he got up, let's say, about 9 o'clock in the evening, night. And he went out to the garden. Well, he gets out there, let's say it's 10 o'clock. And so he's out there for 3 hours. Now, the reason I say 3 hours is because Jesus came in the first time he went off and prayed. He came back and found Peter, James, and John sleeping. He looked at them and he said, "What? Could you not stay awake for 1 hour?" Then he went back and he did it 2 more times. So that would make 3 hours. So that's just a hint. And so let's say about 1 o'clock in the morning. And this is when they came in to arrest him. Well, it would take them an hour and a half, all those hundreds of soldiers to come out, arrest him, take him back in, and get him back to Annas. So then his Jewish trials would have began probably 2:30. Now, as I said, I don't care if you adjust these things an hour or 2 or 3. Doesn't make any difference. This is the general way that this night has gone. So the Jews met in the night then. And so about 2:30 to, let's say, 6. Now, I say 6 because that one is pretty definite. The next thing is going to be when it's daybreak, then we change. So here's what's been going on this night. Now, keep in mind, as we look at this, our time, which we use Roman time, is Thursday night at 6 o'clock, the Passover starts. Now, their time, right here, about that's when the Passover starts. Now, the Passover will continue on until 6 o'clock the next day. Right now, we are at daybreak on Friday. And so the Passover will continue on until tonight. And so these are 3 big days that we've got here because of what they do on the Passover. Then they're going to say in a little while, we need to kill this man so he won't be on the cross on the Sabbath day, which is Saturday. And then on Sunday, Jesus is going to raise from the dead. But let's keep in mind the difference in their time and the way they looked at it. So now, we're at about 6 o'clock, as we will see in here. So they brought him in there to Pilate. So Pilate then went out and said, "What accusation do you bring?" They said, now this is additional information from the last one, "If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you." That's like me taking you to court and the judge says, "Lowell, what charge do you bring?" And I said, "Well, if he wasn't an evil man, I wouldn't have brought him down." So Pilate is left with nothing. Pilate knows that something wrong with the Jews. He said, "You take him and judge him according to your law." He knows that's all that it is. And then they let the cat out of the bag to Pilate. "It is not lawful to us to put anyone to death." So now Pilate knows why they're there before him. Remember I told you I kind of like Pilate? Pilate is learning something. Pilate, of course, is in constant conflict with the Jews, but he's learning about these Jews and what they're doing. So now then he knows they're bringing Jesus to him to force them to put him to death in there. And they're using Caesar and this king business and so forth to do this. Now, as Pilate goes on, now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you king of the Jews?" He said, "It is as if you say it," in there. And then, while he was being accused by them, he answered nothing. The Jews came up. This is the same trial. Jews came up and started gacking, and he didn't answer them. And the governor, Pilate, was really marveled. Why doesn't he ask these guys? So Pilate then entered into the praetorium, takes Jesus in. He said, are you speaking for yourself about this, or did, Jesus said, are you speaking yourself about this, or did others tell you concerning me? So Jesus is asking Pilate, Pilate, are you speaking about me being king of the Jews because you know something yourself? Or is this just based on what the Jews are telling you? Pilate's upset. Am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priest have delivered you to me. What have you done? So in other words, get busy and make some confessions. And then Jesus said, well, my kingdom is not of this world. Yeah, I am a king, but my kingdom is not of this world. If it were of this world, then we would fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from here. So yeah, I'm the king of the Jews, but it's not a physical kingdom that's here. And then Pilate, not understanding this, he doesn't have any spiritual knowledge. So he said, well, are you a king then? And Jesus said, you say rightly that I am a king. Yes, I am a king. In other words, I am a spiritual king. And he said, for this cause I was born, and for this cause I came into the world. I came down from heaven for this, that I should bear the witness to the truth, and everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And that's when Pilate turns around frustrated. What is truth? In other words, you can see the poor guy, he's frustrated. Are you king of the Jews? Well, yes. Well, then, what have you done? Well, I'm not a king of this world. What other kind of kings are there? You see, would be in Pilate's mind. Then, are you a king? And then Jesus throws in another thing. I came down to bear witness of the truth. What is truth? Phew, I can just see. Are you a king? Are you not a king? Have you caused trouble? Have you not caused trouble? What is truth? I can't get to it. Pilate is frustrated. So Pilate knows Jesus is not guilty, so he finds a way to get out of this. He learns that Herod is in town. Now Herod, I think I told you last week, was over Pilate. That's the next Herod. That was a mistake. Herod, here, this Herod, he is the governor of Galilee, the northern part. And Pilate is the governor of Judea, the southern part. So when Pilate finds that Jesus is down there in his territory, but he finds that he's a Galilean, he says, I'll send him up to Herod because he's in his. So he sent him up to Galilee. And he goes up where Herod is, and Herod wants to play around with him. Herod has heard about his miracles, and so Herod hoped to get him to perform some kind of miracles, but he wouldn't deal with Herod. He wouldn't answer Herod. And he questioned him with many words, and he answered him nothing. And finally the chief priests and the scribes stood and vehemently accused him. They're standing there still saying, he's a troublemaker, and so they're going on. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him. So they started mocking him, treating him as though he was a king. It's just like if I declared myself this morning to be President of the United States. Don't you know what would happen this afternoon with all these guys sitting out there? They'd come in and, oh, Mr. President. And so they would start making fun of me instead of taking me seriously, and that's what he's doing. So they talked with him about contempt and mocked, and they arrayed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him back to Pilate. So evidently Herod had one of his gorgeous purple robes out there, and they're playing with Jesus, making fun of him, and they go back and they get this kingly robe and put over him and say, now take him back to Pilate, and this will be a good joke, that taking him back and letting him see, yeah, here's your king. So now then he's going back to Pilate. And when he goes back to Pilate, Pilate goes back to the Jews again, and he tells Pilate, or he tells the Jews, I have a custom, and that is on every Passover at this time of the year, I release one of your prisoners to make the Jewish nation happy. Who do you want me to release? Do you want me to release Barabbas or Jesus, who's called Christ? Now, he knew that Barabbas, and they all knew, Barabbas was a famous criminal. He was a notorious man full of crime. And what's Jesus? He claims to be the Christ, just like me claiming to be the president. Now, Pilate then gave them this opportunity. He's hoping to get out of killing Jesus. Do you want me to release this notorious criminal back into your society? Or do you want me to release this guy that claims to be the king? And they cried out, and there, of course, released Barabbas. Now, it tells us Pilate knew they had handed him over because of envy. They were envious of him. He had too many followers. They wanted to ruin his reputation that's there. And so they all screamed, Barabbas. In other words, the Jews now are demanding, nope, you're not getting out of this, Pilate. Barabbas is the man that we want you to release. Well, about this time, Judas saw that there was no saving Jesus. He saw it's getting serious. The Jews are demanding that he be put to death. And now, for the first time, Judas realizes what he's done. That he has betrayed him, and he's going to be put to death. Now we have to do some guessing in here. But it appears that Judas didn't think he would be put to death. Judas knew the man. Judas knew he had not done one thing wrong. He knew that he could work miracles. He had seen him walk on water. He had seen him raise the dead. He had seen him face attorneys, lawyers of all kind. Certainly nobody could put this good man to death. And here's where I can make 30 pieces of silver. So under that, he then went to the Sanhedrin and he betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. But now it's backfiring. Now then, Judas sees they're going to put him to death. They've got him. They're going to put him to death. And he knows he's in trouble. So as he says, it says he was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the priest and the elders and threw it down at their feet and said, I've betrayed innocent blood. And they now, the Jewish leaders said, what's that to us? He threw it down and walked out. Now, went out and departed and hanged himself. He committed suicide because he was so remorseful. Now remember, Peter went out and wept, but he repented. Judas went out and was so remorseful that he committed suicide. He was a bad man to start with. The chief priest took the pieces of silver and they said, now this is blood money. He earned this by betraying his friend. We can't put this money back into the temple treasury. So that, of course, is hypocritical. They paid it so he would betray him. But now then, they say, we won't do it. They went out and bought a field and called it the Potter's Field. They bought this field and they made it a burial place for people that, the bums and the transits that didn't have any place to be buried. It's just a worthless field that's out there. Evidently, according to Acts, that's where Judas went. He hanged himself, and it said his bowels burst open. There's conjecture of what happened. How did he hang himself? I don't know. Did his bowels burst open when he jumped and rope came to the end of his neck? That's not likely. Did he hang there in that tree or whatever it was for a few days and his body decayed and his bowels burst open, and when they found him, here's all this putrid mess? That's probably what we don't know. But we do know these facts in here that that's what happened. So now then, Pilate comes back to him, and they said Barabbas. He said, well, what shall I do with Jesus who's called the Christ? They screamed, let him be crucified. Pilate said, what evil has he done? They said, let him be crucified. In other words, Pilate's trying to get to the evil. They're going to demand that. So finally, Pilate saw that he couldn't prevail at all. Pilate now sees it's too late. They're going to force my hand. They're going to make me do something. So that's when he took the water, came out, washed his hands, and said, I'm innocent of the blood of this just person. I'll have nothing to do with finding him guilty. You see to it. You take him. And all the people then yelled and answered, his blood be on us and our children. The blood doesn't have to be on you, Pilate. We'll accept the responsibility for the blood. All we want you to do is kill him, because we're not authorized to do so. Then he released Barabbas to them, and when he had scourged Jesus, now that's a big deal, he delivered him to be crucified. Now, Roman law said if you're going to crucify a man, you scourge him first, and that means beat him. And the way they beat an individual, you've seen the pictures, is tie them down and tie their back so it's taut, and then take leather straps with metal, jagged metal nails and so forth on the end of it, and just beat him terribly. And so they took him in, and they scourged him, and they beat him. I can't imagine the pain Jesus went through with all that scourging and beating that's there. Now, at this time, he got this crown of thorns. They put that purple robe on him to make fun of him. They took this crown of thorns, put it on his head, and you see those thorns. And the reason I put this up here is because we ain't got nothing like that out here. Not in this country. Now, when you go back to the Midwest, right there where I lived, these trees are around there. And if these thorns fell in the road and a car drove over them, they would get a flat tire. Many flat tires have come because these thorns are so strong and so long that they would go through a tire just like a nail. It's unbelievable about these thorns that come off of these thorn trees. Now, they took one of these, they rolled it around, put it on his head, and crushed it down on his head to there. Now, it said the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns, put it on his head. They put on him the purple robe, so put the kingly robe back on him. And then they started striking and slapping Jesus with their hands. And then Pilate went out again and said to them, behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. Now look at it this way. Pilate is trying to keep from killing Jesus. They are demanding he doesn't. Pilate is in this predicament. He doesn't want to do something unjust and kill him, but on the other hand, he knows if he doesn't, these Jews have the ability to rebel, rise up, and Caesar hears about the rebellion. The way Caesar worked, he comes down and removes the governor. If you can't keep these people in control, then I'll just remove you. Sometimes he punished them, sometimes he just sent them off. But Pilate knows his job is about to come to an end if he can't control these Jews. So now he puts this purple robe back on Jesus. Jesus is just beat to a pulp. And in Isaiah 52 there, remember it says, so his visage was marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. How bad was Jesus beaten? Isaiah said he'll be beaten more and marred and changed than anybody. He'll be the number one man. You won't be able to recognize him. That's hard for us to visualize. I know I've always visualized Jesus being beaten and his back striped and so forth, but all over. I mean, it was beaten so bad that you couldn't even tell really what it was. So they comes out. He's beaten all over. His face is marred. They put a purple robe on him to show he's a king. They put a crown of thorns, stood him there, and says, "There's your king." Now, what's he saying? He's saying, look at this man. Does he look like a king? Does he act like a king? Look at this man. This man is totally whipped. This man is beaten beyond recognition. This man, we put this robe on him to make fun of him and a crown of thorns. Look at him. And he said, "Behold the man." Look. Hoping that the Jews would look at him and see, boy, this guy is really nothing, because Pilate has brought him as low as you can be brought on the face of this earth. That really is where the whole thing ends. So he tries again in here to keep from killing him, showing him this, "Behold the man." But look in verse 6. Therefore, when the chief priest and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" In other words, it carried no weight with them. They looked at him as a man that has been beaten beyond recognition, made fun of to the nth degree, and no charges brought against him except being a king. And there's your king. There's the kind of king he is. Who would be afraid of him? But the Jews have made up their mind, crucify him. Finally, Pilate, in desperation now, "You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him." In other words, I'm through with this thing. If you want him crucified, you do it. I'm not going to do it. He's coming beside himself. Well, they've already told him, we can't do that. So the Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to our law, he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." Now they're telling Pilate he will be put to death, or we will see that you're out of a job. According to our law, he must die. Now, according to the law of Moses, there was a law of blasphemy. Blasphemers of God were to be put to death. And they're charging him now with blasphemy to God. Here's a man who has proclaimed himself the Son of God, which makes him equal with God. And he is a blasphemer. He will die. Pilate, after trying every legal maneuver he can try, he finally sees the light. He knows there's no logic. He knows it's unlawful. He knows that they're doing this because they envy Jesus. But he knows they are demanding either he kill him or there'll be an uprising and Caesar will move in and take his job. So he ought to die. So Pilate takes him back for another conversation. And he talks to Jesus. "Where are you from? Why do you say this? You say you're not from this earth? You say you're not a king on here?" He's all confused. He doesn't understand anything. And then Pilate says, to him, said, don't you know that I have the power to crucify you and release you? And then Jesus says something to Pilate that's very significant. You could have no power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin. Pilate, let me tell you something. You look at yourself as the total ruler. You have the power of life and death. That's how you look at yourself. You and Caesar rule the world. But I'm telling you that you have no power at all except what God gives you. God has given you the power to crucify me. It's all within God's plan. And God has granted you the power. Remember, Jesus had already explained back in the garden, I could pray to the Father and he would send 12 legions of angels. So I said, Pilate, you've done all you can do. And really, you don't have the power you think you do. Your power comes from God, and the ones that's forcing you into this has the greater sin. They're more sinful than what you are. Well, he tries to release him. Tries to release him, so he comes back out again, and it says, going to release him, and they said, if you let this man go, you're not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. So they're threatening Pilate again. You are going to be removed by Caesar. And so they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate in frustration, shall I crucify your king? That sounds to me like irony, bitterness, gouging. You want me to crucify your king? And the priest said, we have no king but Caesar. We're loyal to Caesar. So the Roman army is going to carry it out. Then he delivered him to be crucified, and then they took Jesus and led him away. So he's headed to the cross. Next week, we'll study what happened on the way to the cross. Class dismissed.